The Cotilli Gallery has served as an exhibit, program, and performance space since 2006, and some of you have seen many of the activities we do here. Over the years, we've hosted exhibits from all over the world on a wide range of topics and displayed a number of private collections. This spring, we're particularly fortunate to have a very special exhibit on Alexander Hamilton. It includes a traveling exhibit around the corner against the wall from the Gilder Lehman Institute of American History. And then works lent to us by three collectors: Adam Levinson of Weston, who's here today, Robert Patelli of Illinois, who was very gracious to lend us the book at the center case back there that is actually formally owned by Alexander Hamilton, has his signature on it. And then William Crescent of Crescent and Son, Old Florida Bookshop in Dania Beach, who lent us the beautiful maps and documents that you see hung on the wall. In addition, we have an artist from Boston, Massachusetts, David Wells Roth, who you're going to hear from today. And he did the artwork that is featured on the back, on the wall behind you. He's going to talk more about that story. So I want to introduce Adam Levinson, who is going to introduce our guest speaker today. Adam.
Thank you very much, Nora. It's a pleasure having worked with Nora, and she deserves a lot of appreciation for everything. So it is my great pleasure to introduce a good friend of mine, and to give a little bit of a couple stories before I give you his bio. So I learned about David when I was doing historical research for the website statutesandstories.com. And on statutesandstories.com you can read all about David's work. You can also go to his website, which is davidwellsroth.com, to see the brilliant career he has and is continuing to have. Let me give you some examples of his career. So we were on the radio last Monday, 2 radio stations, one of which was WLRN. Anyone can go to the Sundial show to listen to our radio broadcast. And we were preparing for the radio broadcast. And David, in addition to doing and being renowned for his Revolutionary War history artifacts and research, he also does judicial portraits and family portraits and corporate portraits. So we had a question about one of the portraits he'd worked on for all the judges in Puerto Rico. And he picks up his phone, we're having lunch, and he makes a phone call. And I'm thinking to myself, what is he doing? Who's going to know the answer to this question about a Puerto Rico judge who has since passed away? And so he, as it turns out, winds up calling to the Chief Justice of the Puerto Rico Federal Courts. And I am a lawyer during the day, and I cannot make phone calls to judges because, first of all, they are not supposed to take calls from lawyers because there are conflict issues. And I'm scratching my head, who's he calling? And long story short, he calls over, speaks to the clerk who transfers him over, and then he has the judge on the phone. So because he does their portraits, they take his calls. So it's very interesting. So that's the first little vignette. Now, another quick example of David. So he also has done, as I said, judicial portraits. But one of the first portraits he does was of a famous judge in Massachusetts. And whenever a portrait is unveiled, they have a big event, a big ceremony where the judge's family and other members of the judiciary and other politicians get invited. So maybe later we can ask David who was at the presentation of that portrait. And there's a report that's coming out yesterday we haven't read. And David is non-political, by the way. He's not Democratic, he's not Republican. He takes money for work from all judges and all comers. But maybe ask him later who he has a picture with, because the judge, the federal judge, that was his first judicial portrait, went to school with William Jefferson Clinton at Oxford, and was roommates with William Jefferson Clinton. So President Clinton, at the time, had retired, had served his term, and was traveling with President Bush, doing fundraising through Africa, and I don't know what country at the time he was traveling to, Bush and Clinton. So there was a letter near his framed portrait that he did of this federal judge from Massachusetts, because that's where David comes from. And the letter from William Jefferson Clinton explains that I'm sorry I couldn't make it to this judicial unveiling of the portrait, but I always like to see it when a judge is framed and hanged. So that's coming from Bill Clinton. So in any event, again, it's my great pleasure to introduce David. So here's his exciting biography. He's an American fine artist, a portraitist, and an illustrator. He was awarded a Ford Foundation Educational Scholarship to study painting at Boston University College of Fine Arts, and he received a BFA in painting. His portraits, paintings of cities, his seascapes, and European and American landscapes, as well as historical subject matter, can be found in public private and American museum collections throughout Europe and the United States. His illustrations cover a wide range of media, including the Wall Street Journal and the History Channel, and many books. So he is a very well accomplished, and we are fortunate to have him participating in this exhibit. After painting a federal judge's portrait in Boston's district court, he was awarded the commission to paint 35 judicial portraits in the federal court in the District of Puerto Rico. I'm sorry? All of them. All of the portraits of Puerto Rico, the federal portraits, were done by David. And again, he has the ability to, he knows a lot of the judges. And we can ask him later during the Q&A, why are the judges always interested in being on the good side of the portrait artist? After living and painting in Europe for 15 years, living and painting in Europe for 15 years, he now resides and paints outside of Boston. Thank you very much, David.
Well, I'd like to start off by first thanking Adam and Leslie and their family for putting me up and putting up with me. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And thanks for reaching out for all this. I'd like to next thank Nora for your kind and generous help while I was panicking while getting this all set up. Thank you for putting up with that too. Appreciate it. And also I'd like to thank Carnegie University for allowing this to take place as well.
Dave, did I leave my phone up there?
Yes.
I want to take pictures. Thank you.
So here we have just an example of my historical work. I'm working on this painting at the moment, and it's not quite finished. The trees are still being worked on. And this is of the Wayside, and it's a very historical landmark in Massachusetts. It's the oldest in the United States, actually, functioning in. And then these are just some examples of other works of mine. Just so you can get just examples of what kind of work I do.
David, can everybody hear you? Let's move the microphone over so I can hear you.
Hello?
Oh.
No control. Hello? Thank you. Okay. Now, so these are other paintings that I've done. Some city scenes, some portraits, and seascapes, etc. And my favorite bridge, Brooklyn Bridge. And some views in New York City. When I was living in France, and this is before I moved to France, on the left side, I was living in New York City right up to college. And then I moved to France, and I traveled through Italy and did some landscapes and cityscapes and so on. And then in 1995, I was given a commission to do paintings in the dentist's office, a big mural of 8 pieces. Each one was average 6 to 8 feet long. And in the middle of that, I met a publicist, and she knew very well the owner of a restaurant called the Union Oyster House Restaurant. Does anybody know that place? Okay. It's the oldest restaurant in America. So I paint really old things all the time. So, so this is the Union Oyster House. So in 1995, I started talking to them, and they said, well, we have a commission we'd like you to do, which is to paint, redo our paintings, historical paintings, relating to the history of the Oyster House. So, included 9 paintings, 30 panels. It was a pretty big job. So I was in the middle of this mural job, and then I started this thing in Boston, so I had to basically commute back and forth from Paris to Boston. So I took the studio in Sudbury and began painting this commission. And it included paintings of Israel Bissell, Daniel Webster, and a guy named Isaiah Thomas, and Count Luckford. So Thomas, anybody know who Isaiah Thomas is? Basketball player. Publisher, okay.
He had a printing press.
Sorry?
He had a newspaper and a printing press.
There you go. So, here we go. So what is this talk about? Is it about the Celtic player or the Patriot? So it's about both. No, it's about Isaiah Thomas, the publisher. And so these are some bits and pieces of Isaiah Thomas's life. He was a Revolutionary War newspaper publisher, and he was responsible for many, many things. He was a philanthropist. He was he had the biggest publishing company at one point in America. He was as well the wealthiest man in America in around 1812, and nobody's heard of him practically. And so he was born in 1749, and his father abandoned him, and his mother put him up for an apprenticeship with a guy named Zachary Fowle, and he was a publisher printer in Boston at the time. So he was a little boy when he was working for Fowle. So they went up to Halifax, they printed, they worked together, and then they had a falling out, and he brought out, oh, by the way, I should mention also, Alexander Hamilton and Isaiah Thomas essentially are both orphans. So that's one similarity. But also, Isaiah Thomas published Alexander Hamilton's very first essay, which was about the hurricane that happened in the Caribbean. And Hamilton was 15 years old, and Thomas published that piece. And then he began to publish other things by Hamilton later on in his life. So then he was also the very first war correspondent. He fought at the Battle of Lexington, and then recorded it later, and then published it a few days later when he moved his press to a place called Worcester, Massachusetts. And he was Sons of Liberty, and his printing shop was filled with the Sons of Liberty, with Dr. Joseph Warren, Paul Revere, James Otis, and John Hancock, who funded his operation during the time of the stoking of the Revolution. So let's see. I already went over this, so then he was the first person to read the Declaration of Independence in Worcester, Massachusetts. So I mean, that affects most of the United States. So these are the paintings as they stand in the Union Oyster House today. And this is what the talk is about, each painting. So on the left side, you see his print shop, and then he had a run-in with the British law, and then he escaped from Boston. I'm going from left to right. Here. And I'm trying to imitate in these paintings the style of the 18th century. And it was proven that worked because a few days after I finished the paintings and put them up on the wall, I was at a copy center in Boston, and I had my papers laid out. I was kind of long-haired and a great t-shirt and paint everywhere. And this woman came up and saw some of my papers with my name on it. And she said, I just came from a very old restaurant, and they had a lot of old paintings on the wall. And your name is the exact same name as the paintings on the wall. I said, really? She said, yeah, they must be a couple hundred years old. I said, no kidding. I said, well, as a matter of fact, I painted them. And she looked at me, she said, right. And then left. So I couldn't take any credit for my own work. That's too bad. So anyway, this is right after the thing was finished. You can see my long hair. But that's in the Boston Globe, where they're doing a little blurb on the board. So this is about Isaiah Thomas and his press right now. So this is a Franklin press, and it stands about this tall, and it's a big, heavy wooden press. And he called it the Old Number One, which was, very, I guess, an affectionate name for this press. And after he dissolved his relationship with Zachary Fowle, he bought the press, he bought the business, and then began to do the whole operation himself. And he started a whole bunch of newspapers, etc. And when you use the press, you have to put the paper in at the bottom of it, and then pull on this bar. You shove it through, and you have this heavy weight come down, and then it presses on with the full weight of the body of the person pulling it, and puts his foot into a stand on the base of the press, and gives it a tug. And they do that about 250 times an hour to get, it's the maximum number of figures that they can print at the same time. So these are various operations of print. So the guy here is inking up the plates, and these plates are comprised of little tiny letters that they set in, and these are type set. So you've heard the term typesetting. So you ink it up, and you close the bar over it with the paper in it, and then press it. These pictures were taken at the Williamsburg, Virginia, which is identical to the one in Boston where Isaiah Thomas worked. And these are some of Isaiah Thomas's original press equipment. You can see where you put the types in this cabinet on the left side, and then another bit of furniture there. These pieces show up in some of my paintings, actually. And these are stored at the American Antiquarian Society in Worcester, Massachusetts. Thomas started that society right after the war, and that's one of America's foremost collections of American history. Now these are various mastheads from Massachusetts Spy, and the first one on the left, on the upper left, is the August 7th, 1770 masthead. That was his first paper that he printed from Massachusetts Spy, and then it gets a little more complicated. And you can see on the right side, there's this snake and a dragon. Benjamin Franklin composed this picture on the upper left, Joined to Die. And then Paul Revere was hired to redo it, essentially, and then engrave it. And then they put that into the masthead for the Massachusetts Spy. So this is my first painting of Isaiah Thomas in his work studio. And you can see Paul Revere sitting over here, John Hancock, my brother, and a few other friends of mine, but they're really old. So this is basically the setup of this print studio, as I kind of imagined it through the research that I had done. Now, his studio was called by the British a sedition foundry because all the founding fathers, the Revolutionary Sons of Liberty in Boston were meeting with Isaiah Thomas, either here or at a place called the Green Dragon Tavern. And the British were trying to silence him, and they were very intimidated by him, so they threatened him by threatening to burn, and they actually burned effigies of him, and they threatened to tar and feather him, they threatened to kill him, a whole bunch of things, but he persevered and was able to make a statement. This painting is called The Summons Challenging Freedom of Speech. Now, Isaiah Thomas, in November 14, 1771, actually printed an article written by a friend of his named Joseph Greenleaf. Greenleaf printed it under the pseudonym of Eustace Scaevola. So he printed this article, which was accusing Hutchinson, the governor of Boston at the time, from Britain, of being a usurper and doing some pretty horrible things to the Bostonians, to the colonists. Thomas printed this article, and then the British got wind of it and came out to arrest him. So Thomas said, "I'm sorry I can't go with you because of pressures of business. So I'm too busy to be arrested." So, you know. And then this is actually the published picture print that Thomas made. And then Hutchinson ordered Thomas to be prosecuted. British condemned Isaiah Thomas and Greenleaf to death. So obviously he didn't get killed, and they both took long lives afterwards. On November 28th, Isaiah Thomas came out with a really hard article condemning the attempt to shut him down, and this was basically one of the very first attempts at fighting for freedom of speech in the American press. And I show this because I was very conscientious of trying to keep accuracy with my paintings. So I have a portrait of Isaiah Thomas, which is painted of him at the time, and I tried to imagine him as a younger man, a 22-year-old guy. So I'm trying to maintain some sort of likeness in his features, etc. The war was starting to heat up. He was threatened by the British to be destroyed. So he was told by John Hancock to get the heck out of there as fast as possible. So he packed up his printing press and his office and shipped everything to Worcester. And so we have here his buddies as he's piling up the press on a ferry boat that goes to Charlestown. And it was around midnight it was on April 16th. Then we have here a map of Boston and Charlestown. And I tried very hard to imagine what the view would have looked like from this old British map. Now here we have Isaiah Thomas's shop, which is right down here. He made the escape up there to the ferry landing over here, and then out to Charlestown. So what would the view appear from that area? I think it was pretty accurate, judging from what little I knew about Charlestown. Well, only one thing, I caught this a couple months ago, and I thought, oh my God, it's too late to change this. If Neil deGrasse Tyson was sitting here, he would really condemn me, because that moon is northwest. We couldn't possibly see the moon there, but I put it in as an artistic endeavor for drama. But I'm sure I'll have my artistic license revoked sooner or later. So the next one is Isaiah Thomas is escaping from Boston 3 days later with his friend Joseph Warren. And they're traveling across Charles River again. Now here, you have the dock in the background here. That's where he had escaped from. And on the dock, you can't really see it in this picture. It's kind of dim. There's the carriage that it's the wagon that brought his press out, but he left out there. So I have all these little clues to connect it all together. And that's Faneuil Hall on the right side. And then the British warships are waiting for the impending attack, which is later that day. So here we have little bits and pieces that I gleaned from the maps. Is the shipyard over here. This is a windmill. It's called Greaves. This is G shipyard and then the windmill, and then Copp's Hill over there. And again, the map here showing the view taken from right here. We're looking down here to Faneuil Hall, and then over here towards the ocean. And you see the warships in the distance. Trying to get as accurate as I can. So after he crosses the river with Joseph Warren, he runs off to Lexington, and he fights as a Minuteman in Lexington, and which is where he actually was an eyewitness to the battles, and then was able to write about it later on. So this is a painting that I had made towards a commemoration for Isaiah Thomas. Now, as a first war correspondence, this is his first paper. Now, over here, at the end of the exhibition down there, is a print out of that first paper. So you can see exactly, you can read it and see what he wrote. And it's pretty dramatic. I've included the first paragraph here, and it's very biting. So you can see he's trying to, it's maybe a little bit of propaganda as well, but it was pretty forceful, and he got people to understand that there was a danger happening. Now, this last painting is called Charlestown Burning, and I imagine the scene from Isaiah Thomas's print shop, right around his print shop, looking towards Charlestown, and the British warships were bombarding it with heated cannonballs, and trying to eliminate the possibility of snipers firing at them from Charlestown. So here, on the right side, is Thomas's shop would have been right around here. So we're looking straight across the river. Now, Charlestown, as it was being bombed, that was also the Battle of Bunker Hill, right at that time. And his friend Joseph Warren was then a general in the army, and he was killed during that battle. He was a hero of the Battle of Bunker Hill. 226 dead and 828 wounded. It's quite a deal. So the way I composed this picture was using this drawing on the right side. I found this by accident, at the Concord, in Concord, New Hampshire, the New Hampshire Historical Society. And it was made by a guy named Benjamin Thompson. Now, who was Benjamin Thompson? Has anybody heard of the Rumford stove? He was a scientist back in the 1800s, and he invented a stove which is basically used by today's technology for fireplaces. And here he is. Now, he was an interesting character, very complex character. He was a scientist, brilliant scientist, and a loyalist to the British. At one time, now it's kind of funny because he was as well a spy. And he tried to spy on Isaiah Thomas, possibly using Thomas's wife, because he apparently had an affair with Thomas's wife, which ended up a divorce for Thomas and his wife. So it was a very bizarre situation going on. Now, these are some of his examples of his inventions. Now, this drawing, he was working as a clerk for a guy named Hosto Haven, who owned this shop. And he left the attic window open in his bedroom where he lived. And when I make paintings of places where I've been, I sometimes do the same thing. Yeah, I guess artists like to show that they were there or something. But this grain shop was owned by a guy named Hosto Haven, who was a Tory, who was a loyalist to the British. Now, Thompson worked for him, but they were right around the corner, literally, from Isaiah Thomas's shop. So you can see this faint image of a house that he drew in. And I'm suspecting that would be Thomas's office, which was then destroyed by the British. So with this, I was able to then put together, a composition, a construction of what the scene should look like. Now this is the Union Oyster today, and I took the facade of his building and put it up here, and then you could see there's a line that goes across here, which is not shown up anywhere else. And also the brickwork in the facade is very different than the brickwork on the side, which means they added on the side much later. So there's the shop as he would have added. And then I constructed this picture of what I imagine the shop would look like. And all sorts of features corresponding. You've got here this big area, there's a fireplace back here, a staircase back here inside, which I think corresponds to a chimney. And he's got a big chimney over here, and everything seems to work perfectly. So I was able to then put that in over here, and I have a British soldier talking to casually talking to the owner of the shop to symbolize what was going on at the time. And Isaiah Thomas's shop here, you can see a broken window on the second floor. So they're probably throwing rocks at the place when Thomas was gone. And then these are some views of my studio. And in order to paint that picture, I was in deed halls in Boston to try to figure out who was on the street at the time that Thomas was there. And I wanted to do that, to find out if there were any signs, like shop signs or anything that I could put in, and to get a sense of the various people that were there. So here's one of the pages from the deeds that I was researching. And then I built a model, an 8-foot model, eventually, of the view to get an idea of the perspective on what it would look like if you're standing on the little street looking towards Charlestown. And this is some of the massive maps and everything in my studio. So those are the paintings as they are completed at the end of all that research, almost 3 years of paintings and research at the same time. So after that, I did another painting called Israel Bissell's Bride, another Revolutionary War character, who apparently, allegedly, people are doubting it, but some people believe it, that he rode from Boston to Philadelphia in 4 days. And that's 345 miles, and killed 3 horses at the time, trying to do it. But he's not remembered. There's a nice poem about Paul Revere, but there are no poems really about Israel Bissell, so nobody really knows who he is. And he was, the poem on Paul Revere, by the way, was written by Longfellow in the Wayside Inn, the building that I showed you at the beginning. And it's part of a series of poems called Tales of the Wayside Inn. And so that's where all Revere is being practiced. Now these are some of my other works. These are my judge portraits. This is in Puerto Rico at the federal court building. And these paintings are hanging right now. And then these are some of the judges. Now this is Judge Stearns on the left, whom we were talking about before. That was the first portrait of the judge that I did. And she was the chief judge, and he's the man who commissioned me to do the whole job. Judge Hussein. And she is Judge Delgado, and she's no longer the chief judge. They have a 3 or 4 year period, and then they step down. And it's some of my life. And that's it. Any questions about the history? Yes?
The Massachusetts spine, it looked like M-A-S-F.
Yes.
Why is that spelling that way?
That was typical of the 18th century. They would have the S's in certain parts of the word as F's.
Really?
Now, I don't know if they actually pronounced it Massachusetts. I don't know. Did they pronounce it like that?
It's known as the long S.
Yeah.
It was used only in the word. It comes out of medieval script. And when they originally created type, the 15th century, he was copying medieval manuscripts. So the long S was a short way, quick way of writing S in the middle of the word. So he put that in. So the way we see letters today is very different from even how they saw letters in the 18th century. And it's only evolved in the last 200 years to be a small S for everything.
Yes.
Yes, I have a question with your actual paints. When you went and painted the buildings and the people, where did you get your palettes, your color? Did you go back to some, something that was 100 years? How did you get to make your paints, or to make them so that they would look like old paints?
Well, first I hired actually had some indentured servants working for me. Some paints. No. You go to the store, you buy paints, they're already pre-made, but there are techniques, certain glazing techniques that you can employ. You have to learn about how they made paintings in those days, and it's indirect painting. Direct painting is when you put the paint down directly on the canvas and you let it there. That's how the Impressionists would paint. That's one way. And then indirect painting, you put the paint down, let it dry, then you put a glaze over it, let it dry, put another layer of paint. It's a long process. It takes a long time. And then you get certain effects that are really rich and luminous. And that's how most old paintings were painted. Rembrandt is famous for that. But and also there's something in the figurative work, to capture the kind of stylized figuring and the natural look, which can implement that kind of look. Yes.
Are you a fan of Edward Hopper? Because your style seems a little
Who's
Edward
that? I
Hopper.
don't know.
Of
Of course, yeah.
Your use of color and
Thank you.
reminds me of his.
Yeah,
the way
he's
he
a
liked-
big influence of mine. My family's from New York originally, and I spent a lot of time in the city. So I'm attracted to that, and he's a famous New York City painter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But reminds me very much of his style.
Well, thank you. Coincidentally, I was born on May 15th, and he died on May 15th. So
Oh, there you go.
whatever that means. But, yes.
When you were hired for the job for the paintings in the old Oyster House, how much leeway did you have as to determining the subject matter of each of the paintings, or did they tell you what they wanted, or did you have carte blanche on what you wanted to do?
That's a really good question. I basically, when I got the job, the sister, it's a brother-sister ownership team. The sister hired me, and she said, whatever you find, paint. Just paint the truth. And I said, okay, fine, I'm going to do a lot of research. And see what I could come up with. So I did that, and it went down roads and paths that we just didn't expect. So yeah, it was, they gave me carte blanche essentially.
Did the topic have to be Isaiah Thomas?
Yeah, because Isaiah Thomas was known to have had his studio there.
Okay,
So that's why it was Isaiah Thomas. It was Count Rumford because he lived in their attic, which was now the 3rd floor of the building. And yeah, so I had to really focus on those topics.
Historical.
But Israel Bissell was something I put in by myself because I found him during the research, and so I made a separate panel painting of that for him. Oh yeah, I can show you. Let's go to the beginning here. Actually, I'll just find the Shirley Oyster House. Now you can see here, all those windows straight across the whole sidewalk. Those are all my panels. Each one tells a little bit of the story. And there are some paintings that I don't have here, which I made about they said that the first town crier was in front over there, and so I have a town crier painting. And I've got little views of the area as well at that time. So yeah, it was a pretty good job. Plus, I included a picture of, 3 pictures of Daniel Webster, because apparently he had oysters at their oyster bar.
Really?
Yeah.
And that other picture is their dining room, the one with
Yes,
their dining
that
room?
is called the Heritage Room. I'll bring that up again. Yeah, that's the Heritage Room on the 2nd floor. And that was showing up on the left side of that building, all the way around. Yes?
I have 2 questions. Number one, from when you were commissioned for this enormous, and thank you for saying yes to this project. It's wonderful, just amazing. How long was the commission? Did it last? Like how many years?
It went from the very beginning of 1995 to the very end of 1997. So almost 3 years.
Oh, I thought it would be longer.
Oh, yeah, I worked hard, fast. Yeah, and it was supposed to be finished early, but I had some changes to make and things were going on, so.
The other question I have is, when this magnificent printing machine came into existence, I imagine there was just one of them in the area,
Oh no, there were a few. Benjamin Franklin had one. There were a couple of printing presses around Boston. He wasn't the only printer. There are other publishers in that area.
oh, so there were more.
Yes.
However, when they took that tiny metal blocks and had to put them, each one, in the container. Is that, first of all, they're tiny, correct? But then it would be so time consuming, and they would be trying to get the word out.
Right.
But they had to stay there and do this tedious thing.
Well, that's right. So basically, time as we see it is very different than time as they saw it. I mean, for example, 30, 20 years ago, when I did illustrations, I would do the illustration. Actually, let's go 40 years ago. Okay? Did the illustration and sent it by mail or dropped it off to the art director, and then they would publish it like 2 or 3 days later. Eventually, modems came into play, and email, and faxing, and suddenly I had 5 hours to do a completed drawing for the Wall Street Journal, for example. I would get the call at 1 in the afternoon, and they would say, okay, can we get it done by 5? I said, yep, no problem, yep. If I didn't answer the phone, they'd go to the next artist. They don't leave messages. So by 1:30, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, they send me the article. I would look at it. By 3:30, I would have to have 3 finished little sketches for them to choose from. Then between 3:30 and 5, after they give me the okay, I'd have to do a finished drawing and have it loaded to them by 5. One hand was clenching my seat, and the other hand was clenching the mouse because my computer would crash every so often, and I would get it out to them. It was stressful. So yes, we had a different time feeling and experience. They would have a lot of little, sometimes children and people working on these types, setting them in. And you'd have a master file that you would give them, they would basically set it. It's unbelievably tedious. I can't even imagine doing that. So thank God for the iPhones, you could just send stuff out.
The essays
Yes.
that Alexander Hamilton wrote were all in longhand.
Longhand, yes.
And then eventually some somebody put them in
They
the
would,
typecast.
exactly, they would put it in, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's tedious. I can't imagine doing that, yeah. Any questions? Any other questions? Yes?
So David, if you could explain the connection. So as you heard, there are people who would take the little typesets, the little letters, and put them in the press. But there were also the post writers. So if you could explain a little bit who some of the post writers were, because when you hear these names of the team that was working with Isaiah Thomas, it's quite an important collection of individuals. So what is the job of the post writer?
I think one of them, I think I have the picture here. This guy over here was a post writer, Paul Revere. And Thomas, I think you mentioned that Thomas instructed him to go out and send the word that the British were coming. So he saw the lanterns on Old North Church, 2 lanterns, so the British were coming by sea. And that was it. He was off riding with his friend Robert Dawes, whose great ancestor actually was my Subaru mechanic, John Dawes. Yes.
My other question is, when you do portraits, either corporate portraits or family portraits, judicial portraits,
Yeah.
what are some examples of things that people want you to do with artistic license, or to include in the portrait, or to take out of a portrait? So just a little bit of background about how you do portraits.
Yeah, some of my judicial portraits include pieces of their life, like Judge Stearns' portrait, for example. Oops. Go back here. Uh-oh. Sorry. Technology is like, there you go. Let me get back to this portrait. So Stearns' portrait, he was a French, he loved French language, so he studied French. So I have the Robert dictionary here. He was a supporter of the Inuits, and he loved the Inuit tribe, so I put an Inuit sculpture here. And his mother called him Don Quixote, so I put a Don Quixote sculpture here. And then he was an Oxford graduate, so I have the Oxford emblem here. And then this book, you can't see it here, but it says Vita, which is not his life. So he's about a third through his life when he was at Oxford. And I put about a third through the book in Oxford. This little globe, he was a world-traveling judge. He did a lot of work in Eastern Europe, trying to set up federal courts in Europe. And I have my little globe that's on my desk. This is the view from his window of Boston Harbor. As they say in Boston, it's Boston Harbor. Any questions? Does that answer your question? Yeah? And because of that, because I put all these objects in there, Judge Bousset saw something that he'd never seen in judge portraits before, objects of the judge's life. And he said, well, that's what I want in my portraits. So some of the judges didn't want objects in, they just wanted to be alone with their hands and their face. And, but other judges, like him, wanted to have objects, so I put his motorcycle collection here and his sports cars. A very serious expression. What was that? Yes. He's serious. He's a serious guy. Yes.
Your work with research, is that something you kind of just stumbled upon, or is that something you mined in maybe in history?
You mean about the oyster house?
No, yours, just overall in your life.
Oh, I try to keep things accurate, you know, when you're dealing with history or people, or just because these are things that the paintings might hopefully live longer than me, and I just want people to know that whatever's in it is factual, you know, and not to deter from actual facts. Anything else? Yes.
Did you ever consult, I guess you did, paintings of other artists that lived in that day? I was wondering what are the names, if there are any, that you know that are artists that painted at that time?
Yes, John Singleton Copley. He was one of the famous artists at the time. Gilbert Stuart. There are a few artists who I admire and try to learn from as well. And Copley did a painting. Of John Hancock. So let's see if I can find it really quickly here. Yeah, Hancock would be sitting over here. So Copley did a really beautiful portrait, which influenced my painting of Hancock. So I was able to know what he looked like, essentially. Yes.
The picture that you showed about burning Charlestown, is there a reason for the woman and child?
Yeah, just
Right.
drama.
Just drama?
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, my sister posted that. Yes.
There's another woman as their fleet, and you mentioned as
Wait a second.
as their fleet, as they're doing the midnight passage. It
Mhm.
seems like there's another woman.
Nope, it's all in my mind.
It's all
Yeah.
okay. Well, I was wondering about like so as a wife, like if you mentioned
The first wife.
Yeah,
Yeah.
first wife, and I don't see her everywhere else. I was just wondering if was she either that woman that was part of the yacht or something.
Well, apparently she, the one who had the affair,
Yeah.
with Robert, apparently, I read some accounts that she was a prostitute from the Caribbean, and I don't know too much about her. In fact, I've read other accounts of him, and they say he was divorced from his first wife, and then they named the second two wives. So she doesn't even get a name in history, basically. It's kind of a shame, but it is. It was a pretty dramatic thing. So I don't remember her name. I think it's Mary Diggle. I think that was her name. But I've read accounts that he sent his wife off to Charlestown during the time that he sent his presses off. But I read other accounts that something else happened, that maybe she went at a certain time or something. But so it's not really clear. That's why I didn't include her here. I wasn't sure. Anybody else?